Hello. It's Thursday, August the 27th, as we continue our mini Bible series and studies looking at the readings for this coming Sunday, the 13th Sunday after Pentecost, August the 30th, 2020. Today we'll be looking at the Gospel and the last of the Bible studies for this week. So thank you for joining me throughout all of August, really, as we continue this process and into next month, I anticipate, and who knows when we'll be able to gather again together, but we all look ahead to that. So I'd like to begin by reading to you Matthew chapter 16, verses 21 through 28, beginning with the introduction to the gospel. After Peter confesses that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, in chapter 16, verse 16, Jesus reveals the ultimate purpose of his ministry. These words prove hard to accept, even for a disciple whom Jesus has called a rock. From that time on, after Peter confessed that Jesus was the Messiah, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you. But he turned to Peter and he said, Get behind me, Satan! You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. Then Jesus told his disciples, If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. The Gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This week's Gospel reading builds on last week's Gospel reading. Well, it has been a whole week for us as we move through these readings. We should consider that last week's Gospel and this week's Gospel are just one flowing storyline for Jesus and the original disciples. So if you wanted to take the time and go back to reread the verses starting at Matthew chapter 16, verse 13, you could always pause this and go back and look at that again and then come back to this. Just moments ago in the storyline, that is, as Jesus and the disciples walked through the region of Caesarea Philippi, Peter and the other disciples ponder Jesus' question, Who do you say that I am? While not limiting himself to the options and the opinions offered by others, Peter proclaims his answer. You are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. Peter got it right. Although in the very next moment, today's gospel, they continue to walk along and Peter gets it wrong. Wrong enough that Jesus suggests that Peter is in league with Satan, working against God's plan for salvation. As I imagine this scene, it all happens in a matter of minutes. Peter scores points for the correct answer. Maybe the disciples are giving Peter those pats on the back. Or in today's world, it might be the high five, Peter. And while this is happening, Jesus is continuing to walk along, and he's continuing to tell his disciples what's happening, and he predicts his death at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes in verse 21. All of a sudden, it's like a light bulb flashes for Peter here, and even though it had been revealed to him by God a few minutes ago that Jesus was the Messiah, now Peter physically takes Jesus off to the side and begins to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you." In verse 22. I'm wondering if Peter and his pride, because we knew he had pride, maybe got the best of him after he gave that right answer just moments earlier. So much so that Peter physically grabs a hold of Jesus and pulls him off to the side to say that, "Look, Jesus, I know you're the Messiah and all, but I think you got this one a little bit wrong." As you heard, in the gospel reading just a few minutes ago, this really earned Peter a shocking rebuke from Jesus. "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." We're talking about a matter of minutes here, that Peter went from being the rock upon which to build a church to being a stumbling block in league with Satan. The disciples may have been still having their hands up in the air to give that high five, and now their mouth drops. They've got that slack-jawed, dumbfounded look. And I imagine this scene with them thinking, what in the world just happened? Our gentle, spiritual guide and teacher just did a 180, and all of a sudden this turned into a fire and brimstone sermon. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever had these feelings of euphoria? Because you knew you were filled with God's Holy Spirit. You knew you were walking faithfully with the Lord. And then, within moments, your human nature, that which Paul calls the sinful flesh, takes control. And you start to notice all of the cares of the world that they're pushing in on you, whether it's over the news or social media, or however you start hearing about all of these problems in the world, and something happens. Or maybe someone tells you something that crushes your spiritual high, and you react badly. Maybe once or twice, like Peter in today's gospel. You even go so far as to think, well, God cannot want that, because that was not how I expected things to go. No doubt, part of the confusion for the disciples in today's gospel comes from their surroundings, the fact that they are still in Caesarea Philippi, which you heard last week is a hub for politics and Roman activity. Traditional Israeli expectations of the Messiah is for a military leader, military power, and driving out the Roman oppressors through war, perhaps, or other ways of violence, and returns the kingdom of Israel to the Jewish leaders. It really would have been natural for Peter and the other disciples, other Israelites, to expect that on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus is going to build up an army, and he's going to have a following of all of these military strength and trained people, and he's going to enter Jerusalem, and he's going to crush the Roman oppressors, and there'll be this grand revolution. And when Jesus says that he's going to Jerusalem to be put to death, he crushed all of their hopes and dreams for security, maybe even for influence, possibly even for power. Security, influence, power. These would be some of the primary human things that Jesus says Peter is overly focused on after having just received this divine revelation about Jesus being the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Security, influence, power, these are still human priorities, even for we who are living in this 21st century America. All of us, we want to feel secure, especially with our finances, with our future, with our living situations. Many people want to be influencers, which is why so many people have these opinions that they put out there on social media websites, or some even use various websites to put their own statements out there on a regular basis, and they earn a living that way. They can get advertisers or whoever to pay them for their opinions. And some folks look to establish a power base in business, maybe even in politics, and then that gives them a sense of control. Jesus sees a bigger picture in which he realizes, and he wants to teach the disciples, that all of the human things, like influence and power and security, all of those things that we work so hard to maintain, are temporary, while the divine things are eternal. In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal." At Caesarea Philippi, Jesus rebuked Peter. And this is an echo of Jesus' temptation in the wilderness, where he repudiates the devil. Jesus refuses to avoid the journey that lies ahead of him, despite the fact that there is the promise of pointless suffering caused by human sin and violence enacted toward an innocent person, one in which the devil will appear to win. Jesus' conclusion, however, in this prediction, points out that the idea that the devil wins is a lie. Jesus' conclusion is with these brief words: "On the third day, Jesus will be raised." One thing to remember is that Jesus does not expel Peter from the group like he did to Satan in the original wilderness temptations. Jesus tells Peter something that sounds a little harsh to us until we look at it from a different perspective. Jesus tells Peter, "Get behind me." He's reminding Peter, here is your place right now. You're a disciple. Continue learning from me by following me. Get behind me. And Peter's day, along with the rest of the disciples, will come for them to be sent. That's what the Greek word apostle actually means, to be sent. So the day will come when they will be apostles who are sent out to become leaders in the faith. John Maxwell wrote a small book called Failing Forward. Sadly, for me, it was one of those books that I loaned out to someone and I never saw it again. And maybe it's still circulating out there among people who need to read it, I hope, for the best in that way. And the undertitle of Failing Forward, if you can call it that, is Turning Mistakes into Stepping Stones for Success. And it tells us little stories that we may have never heard before about people who achieved great things, and I mean really great things in their life. You would recognize the name of every person in this book, and how they learned and began by making mistakes, sometimes epic failures. Peter could easily be someone in that book. The Bible makes no secret of Peter's mistakes and failures. And the Bible makes no secret of Peter's achievements and successes in the building up of the body of Christ and the Christian church. Peter is a great example of failing forward, from which I would wager that we could learn, especially when we learn that we do not always have to get it right. Jesus never asks us to blaze a trail. He asks us to follow, to get behind him as he leads. And yes, that sometimes means picking up a cross. And it will likely mean making mistakes and experiencing failures. Lord knows I've had my share of those. Yet we cling to the promise that Jesus has told us he will never leave us and he will never abandon us. Thank you for joining me today and for all of this week as we have made this journey, these mini Bible studies based on the readings for this coming Sunday, the 13th Sunday after Pentecost, August the 30th, 2020. Have a great day and God bless.